When a boy loses the movement of his legs without explanation, the only clue comes from the mouth of the one they least expected. What seemed like care may be exactly the opposite. The sun was setting slowly over the hills of Boston, painting the sky in orange hues that contrasted with the modernity of Beacon Hill. On the terrace of his imposing mansion, Robert Morgan observed the city while absent-mindedly swirling the whiskey in his glass. His face, marked by time and experience, reflected a peculiar mixture of success and solitude. "Dad, look what I made!" The childish voice cut through the silence, bringing Robert back to reality. Lucas, his 6-year-old son, was running toward him with a colorful drawing in his small hands. The boy had his mother's eyes, large, expressive, with that same sweetness that had won Robert over years ago. "Let me see, son." Robert adjusted his glasses and examined the drawing. It was a simple representation of 3 people, a tall man, a boy, and an ethereal figure in the background with wings. "Who are these?" "Us, Dad, me, you and Mom, watching us from heaven." Robert felt the familiar weight of that absence. It had been 3 years since Hannah had departed, taken by a sudden illness. 3 years trying to be both father and mother. To Lucas, while managing one of the largest business conglomerates in Massachusetts. "It's very beautiful, son." Robert ran his hand through the boy's brown hair. "Has Mrs. Annie prepared your bath?" "Yes, but I wanted to show you the drawing first." "Go take your bath then. We'll talk more about the drawing at dinner." Lucas nodded and ran off, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Robert watched his son leave, recognizing in his gestures the same curiosity and intelligence he had always admired in Hannah. Although he never demonstrated it with effusive hugs or emotional words, his dedication to Lucas was absolute. Ensuring that his son had a safe and happy childhood, even without his mother's presence, had become his silent priority. Inside his office, the stack of documents awaited his attention. As usual, Robert would work until late. His partners and competitors knew him for his coldness in negotiations and for the almost mathematical precision in his decisions. The calculator, they called him in corporate corridors, a man who rarely yielded to emotions in the business world. What few knew was about his other face, the discreet generosity with which he supported charitable institutions, always avoiding the spotlight. Robert believed that good deeds lost their meaning when announced. That night, however, his meticulously planned routine would be altered. His assistant called reminding him of the charity event for which he had confirmed his attendance, a dinner, organized by Boston's business elite in support of social projects. "I can't leave Lucas alone," he muttered to himself, already thinking about cancelling his participation. It was then that Mrs. Annie, his housekeeper for more than a decade, knocked on the office door. "Mr. Robert, the boy has already bathed and is having dinner. If you need to go out, I can stay with him. My Caleb will also sleep here tonight. The 2 of them can watch that dinosaur movie Lucas loves so much." Caleb, Mrs. Annie's son, was 10 years old and frequently spent time at the mansion when his mother needed to work late. Lucas loved the older boy's company, who demonstrated admirable patience for playing with a 6-year-old. Robert nodded, silently thanking his employee for her loyalty. Perhaps the event would be a good opportunity to clear his mind. Since Hannah's departure, he had closed himself in an almost monastic routine divided between work and caring for Lucas. The Boston Cultural Center was elegantly decorated for the event. Soft lights, ambient music performed by a string quartet, and Boston's social elite in gala attire. Robert, in his impeccably tailored suit, greeted acquaintances with the minimum necessary cordiality. He had never been a man of prolonged formalities. It was during the presentation of the social projects supported by the event that he noticed her. A woman of medium height, wavy brown hair falling over her shoulders, wearing a discreet but elegant navy blue dress. It wasn't her beauty that caught Robert's attention, though it was undeniable, but rather the passion with which she spoke about her work. "The Rebirth Project serves children who have experienced deep emotional traumas," she explained at the microphone, her melodious voice carrying a mixture of authority and compassion. "Our approach integrates psychological support, artistic activities, and family monitoring to rebuild these children's trust in the world. Robert found himself unusually interested. Her work indirectly touched on Lucas's situation, a boy who, despite material privileges, carried the trauma of his mother's premature loss. At the end of the presentation, during the cocktail reception, Robert approached her. "Your project is impressive, ma'am." Isabella Martinez. She extended her hand in a firm gesture, her brown eyes meeting his with serene confidence. "And thank you. It's challenging work, but rewarding." Robert Morgan. He returned the handshake, noting the absence of rings on her fingers. "Your focus on childhood trauma particularly interested me. I have a 6-year-old son who lost his mother 3 years ago." Isabella's face softened into an expression of genuine empathy. "I'm sorry. That's a delicate age to deal with such a significant loss. How has he been adapting?" The question, asked without the artificial tone of pity that Robert so detested, opened the way for a deeper conversation. For the first time in a long time, he found himself speaking openly about Lucas, about the challenges of raising him alone, about the small daily victories and difficulties. Isabella listened attentively, offering professional insights without sounding presumptuous. "Children are surprisingly resilient," she commented, "but that doesn't mean they don't need support to process their emotions. Art often serves as a language when words are difficult." "The drawing," murmured Robert, remembering Lucas's creation that afternoon. "Pardon?" "Lucas made a drawing today, the two of us and his mother as an angel." Robert rarely shared such personal details with strangers, but something in Isabella's calm presence dissolved his usual barriers. The conversation flowed naturally to other topics: literature, classical music, the social challenges of Boston. Isabella revealed herself to be a cultured woman, with firm opinions, but open to dialogue. With a degree in psychology from Boston University, specializing in childhood trauma, she had dedicated the last 5 years to the social project she had created. The event was coming to an end when Robert, in an impulse that he would later consider completely out of his methodical character, invited her for coffee the next day. "To talk more about possible collaborations between your foundation and my company," he justified, although both perceived that the interest transcended the professional. Isabella smiled, a contained smile that lit up her eyes. "It will be a pleasure, Mr. Morgan." "Robert," he corrected. "Just Robert." Upon returning home that night, he found Lucas asleep on the living room sofa with Caleb vigilant by his side, watching the dinosaur movie with the volume low. "He tried to wait for you, Mr. Robert," explained the boy, "but sleep was stronger." Robert thanked Caleb and carried his sleeping son to his room. As he covered him, he allowed himself a rare moment of personal reflection. Perhaps it was time to make room for new possibilities in his life. The image of Isabella, with her serene presence and understanding gaze, remained vivid in his mind. That same night, in her apartment in Back Bay, Isabella Martinez turned off her laptop after thoroughly researching Robert Morgan. Newspaper articles, corporate interviews, mentions in social columns, everything built the profile of a powerful, reserved man, and more importantly, vulnerable in his dedication to his motherless son. Her fingers drummed lightly on the table as a subtle smile formed on her lips. The meeting had not been casual. She had carefully planned her participation in the charity event, knowing of Robert's confirmed presence. The approach about childhood trauma had been calculated to attract his attention. What Robert could not imagine was that, behind that gentle smile and that apparent dedication to noble causes, lay a much more complex purpose. Isabella closed the laptop and walked to the window, contemplating the city lights that extended as far as the eye could see. "Phase 1 completed," she murmured to herself, as her thoughts were already occupied with the next steps of a meticulously elaborated plan. In the weeks that followed, the meetings between Robert and Isabella became increasingly frequent. What had begun as professional conversations about possible partnerships between his company and her social project soon evolved into dinners, walks through Boston Common, and visits to art exhibitions. To the surprise of his closest employees, The always reserved Robert Morgan now smiled more frequently and even left the office early occasionally. "The boss is different, don't you think?" Mrs. Annie commented to her son, Caleb, as they prepared Sunday lunch. "He seems lighter." Caleb, with his usual perceptive observations of a child, shrugged. "He looks at his phone a lot and smiles to himself. My friend Peter said his dad was like that when he met his new girlfriend." Mrs. Annie just smiled, turning her attention to seasoning the chicken. After 3 years of seeing her boss immersed in work and responsibilities, the idea of seeing him rebuilding his personal life seemed like a blessing. It was on a sunny Sunday that Robert finally introduced Isabella to Lucas. He had carefully planned the meeting, a picnic in Boston. Common, with a view of Blue Hills, neutral place, relaxed environment, no pressure. "Lucas, this is my friend Isabella. She works helping children." The boy, initially shy, partially hid behind his father's leg, his curious eyes studying the wavy-haired woman who smiled gently at him. "Hello, Lucas," said Isabella, bending down to be at his height but maintaining a respectful distance. "Your father told me you really like dinosaurs. Is that true?" The boy's eyes lit up with the subject. "Yes, especially carnivores like T-Rex and Velociraptor. You know, I brought a gift that you might like." Isabella took a small package wrapped in colored paper from her purse. Lucas looked at his father, seeking approval. With Robert's nod, the boy opened the present, revealing an illustrated book about paleontology adapted for children. His exclamations of joy were immediate. "Look, Dad, it has images of how they found the fossils and everything." Robert observed the interaction with caution and relief. Isabella had gotten the present right, educational but fun, aligned with his son's interests. More importantly, she hadn't tried to force premature intimacy, remaining respectful of the boy's natural boundaries. That afternoon went better than Robert could have hoped. Isabella showed genuine interest in the stories Lucas told about school, friends, and his favorite dinosaurs. When the boy went off to play in the nearby playground, always under his father's watchful eye, Isabella shared some observations. "He's a brilliant boy, Robert, very articulate for his age, and perceptive." "Hannah always read a lot to him since he was a baby," commented Robert, a rare moment when he mentioned his late wife without the pain showing in his voice. "I think that stimulated his vocabulary. I also noticed that he constantly seeks your approval. It's natural considering the loss he suffered. The father figure becomes the center of his emotional security." Robert nodded, thoughtful. "Sometimes, I wonder if I'm doing enough. Hannah would know exactly how to handle each situation. I just improvise." Isabella lightly touched his arm, a gesture of comfort. "You're doing an incredible job, Robert. He is balanced, polite, curious. These are signs of a loving and stable upbringing." Those words of validation touched Robert more deeply than he would like to admit. For 3 years, he had carried with him the silent doubt of being up to the role of single father. Hearing from a professional, someone who worked daily with traumatized children, that he was on the right track was like receiving an absolution he didn't know he needed. The following meetings included Lucas more frequently: cinema, zoo, interactive museums. Isabella seemed to know the best places to entertain and educate a 6-year-old. Gradually, Lucas's initial reservations gave way to genuine excitement when he knew Aunt Izzy would accompany them. It was after 2 months of growing coexistence that Robert, at a dinner for 2 at his favorite restaurant in the financial district, made the invitation. "I've been thinking, Isabella. The house is too big for just Lucas and me. You mentioned your lease expires next month. Perhaps it would be convenient. I mean, if you're comfortable with the idea." Isabella observed him with that half smile that had become familiar. Robert Morgan, at a loss for words. That's a rarity. He took a deep breath, reorganizing his thoughts. "I'm inviting you to live with us, Isabella. No pressure, no predefined expectations, just I'd like to have you more present in our lives." Her smile widened, warming her brown eyes. "Yes, I'd love to, but we need to think about how to present this to Lucas. He needs to feel he has a voice in the process." "I completely agree. We can talk to him together tomorrow." Lucas's response surprised with its maturity. After Robert's careful explanation, about how Isabella would now be living with them, the boy remained silent for a few moments, processing the information. "Is Aunt Izzy going to be my mom now?" he finally asked. Robert and Isabella exchanged alarmed looks, but she answered with serenity. "No, Lucas, your mother will always be your mother, even if she's not physically with us. I will be a special friend who lives in the same house, someone who cares very much about you and your father, and who will be here to help, talk, play, but never to replace your mother." The boy seemed to ponder the response. "Like Aunt Clara, who is special but isn't my mom?" "Exactly," confirmed Robert, relieved by the comparison his son had found. Clara, Hannah's sister, was a loving presence in Lucas's life, visiting them whenever her doctor's schedule allowed. "Then it's okay," decided Lucas, to then add with childish practicality, "Can Aunt Izzy have the room next to mine? That way she can tell me stories before bed when you're working, Dad." Isabella's move happened gradually over 2 weeks. She brought few belongings. "I've always preferred quality over quantity," she explained, and integrated into the house routine with surprising ease. For Mrs. Annie, initially wary of the new resident, Isabella proved respectful and collaborative, never interfering in her culinary domain, only occasionally suggesting more nutritious recipes, thinking of Lucas's health. Isabella's presence brought subtle but significant changes to the environment. The house, previously functional and organized, gained more welcoming touches: ornamental plants, colorful cushions, ambient music on Sunday afternoons. More important, however, was how she filled gaps in Lucas's routine that Robert, with his overloaded schedule, hadn't even realized existed. She monitored the boys' school assignments, introduced nightly reading sessions, organized educational games, and even began a small gardening project with him in the back of the property. "Taking care of plants teaches responsibility and patience," she explained, besides connecting him with natural cycles of growth. For Robert, the relief was palpable. His company was going through an expansion phase that required long hours at the office and frequent trips to New York. Knowing that Lucas was in good hands allowed him to focus on business without the constant guilt that had accompanied him in recent years. "You've transformed our lives," he commented one night when they were finally alone after Lucas fell asleep. They were on the terrace, sharing a bottle of wine under Boston's starry sky. "I never imagined it would be possible to reconcile career and fatherhood without the constant feeling of failing at both." Isabella rested her head on his shoulder, her jasmine perfume mixing with the night breeze. "You've transformed mine too. Robert, I found a purpose beyond work, a place to belong." The following months established a new normality for the unconventional family. Isabella balanced her work at the social project with caring for Lucas, occasionally taking the boy to see the facilities and interact with the children served. "Exposure to social diversity is fundamental to developing empathy," she justified. It was around the 6th month of cohabitation that the first signs appeared, so subtle they would go unnoticed by eyes less attentive than Caleb's. Mrs. Annie's son, now 11 years old, continued to frequent the mansion regularly. He and Lucas maintained an unlikely friendship, considering the difference in age and social reality, but genuinely affectionate. Caleb had assumed the role of protective older brother, always vigilant about the little one's well-being, as he affectionately called Lucas. It was Caleb who first noticed the small changes in his friend's behavior. Lucas, previously energetic and talkative, occasionally showed lethargy, especially after meals prepared by Isabella. "Healthy food for proper growth," she always said, insisting on personally supervising the boy's nutrition. On a particularly hot afternoon, while playing in the garden, Lucas complained of leg pain. "It hurts here," he pointed to his thighs and knees, "and sometimes it tingles." "Did you tell your dad?" asked Caleb, frowning with concern. "Aunt Izzy said it's just growing pains, that all boys go through it." Caleb nodded without questioning. After all, Isabella was an adult and worked with children. She would certainly know more than him about these things. Still, something in that explanation didn't seem entirely satisfactory. That same night, Caleb silently observed as Isabella administered medicine to Lucas before bed. "It's just vitamins," she explained, upon noticing his curious look, "to help with studies and growth." The liquid had a strange coloration, an amber tone that Caleb had never associated with children's vitamins. More disturbing, however, was the expression that quickly crossed Isabella's face when she thought no one was observing her, a mixture of satisfaction and calculation that completely clashed with her usual serenity. Without exactly understanding why, Caleb felt a shiver run down his spine. That persistent feeling that something wasn't right remained with him as he helped his mother organize the kitchen before they left. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "do you think Miss Isabella really likes Lucas?" Mrs. Annie stopped what she was doing, facing her son with surprise. "What a question, boy. Of course she does. She takes care of him as if he were her own son. It's just that sometimes she looks at him in a strange way, like he's an experiment or something." The housekeeper sighed, returning to putting away the dishes. "Caleb, you've been reading too many mystery stories. Ms. Isabella is a psychologist. Her way is different indeed, more observant." Caleb nodded, not wanting to contradict his mother, but the uncomfortable feeling remained, silently growing like a seed planted in fertile soil of suspicion. Rain fell incessantly over Boston that Thursday morning, transforming streets into small streams and tinting the sky a melancholic gray. Inside the Morgan mansion, the climate wasn't much different. Lucas, now almost 7 years old, was lying in his bed, paler than normal, with his eyes half closed, while Isabella applied cold compresses to his forehead. "I don't understand," muttered Robert, walking back and forth in his son's room. "He was fine last night." "Children can develop sudden fevers," responded Isabella, her calm voice contrasting with Robert's evident anxiety. "Their immune system is still developing. I've already called Dr. Paul. He should arrive in an hour." Dr. Paul Mitchell was the new pediatrician attending Lucas. The family's former doctor, Dr. Jenkins, who had followed the boy since birth, had been subtly replaced a few months after Isabella's arrival. "Dr. Paul has a specialization in pediatric neurology," she had explained. At the time, considering the history of migraines in Hannah's family, it would be prudent to have a specialist following Lucas. The logic seemed incontestable, and Robert, always pragmatic when it came to his son's health, had accepted the change without major questioning. "Dad," Lucas's weak voice brought Robert back to the present moment. "My legs are hurting again." Robert sat on the edge of the bed, running his hand through his son's damp hair. "Where exactly does it hurt, son?" "Everywhere. And they're heavy, like there are stones inside." Isabella intervened gently. "These are the symptoms Dr. Paul mentioned, remember? Associated with accelerated growth." Robert frowned. In recent months, Lucas's complaints about leg pain had intensified, evolving from occasional discomfort to something that now seemed to physically limit him. The boy, previously agile and always ready to run through the garden, now frequently asked to be carried or preferred seated activities. "Maybe we should seek a second opinion," suggested Robert, his voice low so Lucas wouldn't perceive his concern. "Call Dr. Melissa, perhaps." An almost imperceptible shadow crossed Isabella's face before being replaced by her usual expression of serenity. "Of course, if you think it's necessary. But Dr. Paul has already requested all possible tests and ruled out any serious condition. Besides, Dr. Melissa is traveling to an international conference, remember? You yourself commented on the postcard she sent from Barcelona." Robert nodded, vaguely remembering the mention of the former family pediatrician's trip. His mind was too occupied with growing concerns about Lucas's health and with the recent problematic acquisition of a factory in Cambridge. Dr. Paul arrived punctually, as always. Tall, with a well-trimmed beard and modern framed glasses, he conveyed an image of professional competence that inspired confidence. After examining Lucas, his diagnosis followed the line of previous ones. "The symptoms are consistent with a mild neuromuscular condition, possibly associated with growth," he explained in the hallway, out of Lucas's earshot. "We'll adjust the medication and observe the evolution. Nothing alarming for now, but I suggest we maintain bi-weekly monitoring. And what about the leg pain? Insisted Robert. He could barely walk to the bathroom this morning. Part of the picture, responded the doctor with confidence. The nervous system sends confused signals to the muscles during certain phases of development. The good news is that I haven't detected significant muscle atrophy, which rules out serious degenerative conditions. Isabella, who was watching the conversation in silence, asked a technical question about neurotransmitters and synapses that Robert didn't fully understand. The doctor responded with equal technicality, and both exchanged medical terms that, although impressive, left Robert with the uncomfortable feeling of being excluded from a crucial conversation about his own son. In the days that followed, Lucas alternated between periods of apparent improvement and inexplicable relapses. One morning he would be animated, trying to play in the garden with Caleb. The following afternoon, he could barely get out of bed without assistance. The only constant was Isabella's vigilant presence, administering medications, controlling the boy's diet, special diet recommended by Dr. Paul, and meticulously documenting each symptom in a notebook she kept on her nightstand. "I'm worried about Lucas," Caleb confided to his mother while helping fold towels in the laundry room. "He's getting weaker and weaker." Mrs. Annie sighed, the concern evident in her face, prematurely aged by hard work. "Me too, son. Sometimes he reminds me of Lucy from the Gonzalez family. Remember her? The girl who got so sick she needed a wheelchair? But Lucas doesn't have the same disease as her, does he?" "I don't know, son. Mr. Robert has taken him to so many doctors that it must be something rare." What Mrs. Annie didn't share with her son were her own disturbing observations, like the fact that Lucas seemed more willing in the mornings when Isabella left early for social work, allowing the housekeeper to prepare his breakfast, or how the boy frequently vomited after meals prepared exclusively by Isabella. Small details that, in isolation, could be coincidences, but added up formed a disturbing pattern that the simple woman couldn't fully decipher. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when Lucas had spent hours crying in pain before finally falling, asleep under the effect of medication, Robert cancelled all meetings and locked himself in his office. The impotence in the face of his son's suffering was corroding him from within. Without thinking twice, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Dr. Melissa, this is Robert Morgan. I know you're busy, but I need your help. It's about Lucas." On the other end of the line, the familiar voice of the doctor who had followed Lucas since birth brought a strange relief. "Robert, I'm surprised by your call. I thought you had definitely opted for Dr. Paul." "It's complicated," he responded, hesitant. "Lucas is getting worse, constant pain, weakness in his legs. The diagnoses are vague. The medications seem to only sedate without solving the problem. I need someone I fully trust to take a look at him." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Robert, I'm not in Barcelona. I never was. I'm in Boston, attending normally. I don't know where you got this information about a trip." The shock of that revelation hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. Isabella had mentioned Dr. Melissa's trip several times in recent weeks, even commenting on postcards the doctor had supposedly sent. Why would she lie about something so easily verifiable? "I can see Lucas tomorrow itself in my office," continued Melissa, unaware of the storm of thoughts now assailing Robert. "Bring all the exams and medical reports you have." "I prefer it to be discreet," he responded, an instinctive caution guiding his words. "Can I bring him as if it were just a social visit? To your house, perhaps?" Something in Robert's tone of voice must have communicated the gravity of the situation, as Melissa agreed without asking additional questions. "My address is still the same. Come at 7 p.m. I'll tell my secretary I have a migraine and will leave the office early." After hanging up, Robert remained motionless, staring at the wall of his private library. For the first time since Isabella had entered their lives, a concrete suspicion began to take shape in his mind, a suspicion so disturbing that he was reluctant to give it a name. At dinner that night, he observed Isabella with renewed attention. The way she insisted that Lucas take his special juice before the meal, how she monitored each forkful the boy brought to his mouth, how she discreetly added a white powder to the sauce served only on his son's plate, when she thought no one was looking. "I'm not hungry," muttered Lucas after a few bites. "Can I go to sleep?" "Of course not, dear," responded Isabella with her melodious voice, but Robert detected an unusual firmness in her tone. "You need to eat to be strong. At least 5 more bites, yes? For me?" The boy obeyed reluctantly, his movements increasingly slow, almost lethargic. At the end of the meal his eyes were heavy and he could barely keep his head up. "He seems very sedated," commented Robert as he carried his son to the room. "What was the dosage of the medicine today?" "The same as always," responded Isabella promptly. "The one recommended by Dr. Paul. It must be just accumulated fatigue." After putting Lucas to bed, Robert returned to the dining room and found Isabella methodically storing some vials in a small thermal bag. Upon noticing his presence, she closed the bag with a quick movement. "Vitamins?" he asked, keeping a casual tone. "Yes, and some dietary supplements," she responded, storing the bag in the refrigerator. "Dr. Paul prescribed a new nutritional combo that can help with nutrient absorption." That night, while Isabella slept, Robert sneaked into the kitchen and examined the thermal bag. Inside, he found several vials with labels from compounding pharmacies, some with names of medications he didn't recognize, others completely without identification. He took discreet photos with his cell phone, taking care to leave everything exactly as he found it. The next day, he alleged an emergency meeting in Cambridge to justify his absence during the afternoon. "I'll take Lucas with me," he announced, during breakfast. "Carlos's son is having a birthday, and there will be a small celebration at the company. It will be good for him to change airs." "I don't think it's prudent," Isabella immediately countered. "He had a fever last night, remember? Exposure to other children could further compromise his immune system." "It will only be for a few hours," insisted Robert with a firmness that admitted no contestation. "And it will be good for his spirit." Something in Robert's look must have communicated that he wouldn't yield, as Isabella backed down, although visibly against it. "In that case, I'll prepare the medication for you to take. He'll need to take it punctually at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. "That won't be necessary," responded Robert, serving himself more coffee. "Dr. Paul mentioned yesterday that we could pause the medications for 24 hours to evaluate the body's response. Don't worry, I'm aware of the risks." The lie came out with surprising naturalness, and Robert carefully observed Isabella's reaction. A brief flash of alarm crossed her eyes before she recomposed her serene expression. "I understand. I don't." "Remember that specific guidance, but if you spoke directly with him." At 1 p.m. Robert left with Lucas, promising to return early in the evening. Instead of driving to Cambridge, however, he took his son to a hotel in downtown Boston, where they remained until the scheduled time with Dr. Melissa. Away from Isabella's influence and without taking any medication throughout the afternoon, Lucas demonstrated a vitality that Robert hadn't seen in weeks. There were still complaints of pain and fatigue, but the boy managed to walk around the hotel room without assistance and even showed interest in watching cartoons, a stark contrast to the almost comatose lethargy that frequently affected him at home. At 6:45 p.m., father and son arrived at Melissa's residence. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with grey hair and perceptive eyes, received them with a warm hug and an exclamation of surprise at seeing Lucas's physical state. "My God, Robert, he's well below the weight for his age, and that paleness." For almost 2 hours, Melissa examined Lucas meticulously, asking questions, testing reflexes, observing reactions. Robert showed her the photos of the medications and reported the behavioral changes of recent months. When Lucas finally fell asleep, on the couch, exhausted from the day without sedatives, Melissa sat before Robert, her professional expression giving way to a gravity he had rarely seen. "Robert, what I'm going to say is extremely serious and based only on preliminary observations. We'll need more specific tests for confirmation, but—" She paused, carefully choosing her words. "Lucas's symptoms are consistent with chronic poisoning by substances that affect the peripheral nervous system." The world seemed to freeze around Robert. "Poisoning?" The word came out as an incredulous whisper. There are documented cases, continued Melissa, her professional voice masking the underlying horror, of a psychological disorder where caregivers intentionally cause or fabricate illnesses in people under their care. In medical literature, we call it Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The motivations vary, but often involve seeking attention, control, or even secondary benefits. Robert felt his blood freeze in his veins. Are you suggesting that Isabella, that she deliberately— I'm not making definitive accusations, interrupted Melissa firmly. But I need you to answer me. Who administers Lucas's medications? Who controls his diet? Who has exclusive access to him during prolonged periods? The answers were all the same. Isabella. We need to act with extreme caution, continued the doctor. If my suspicions are correct, directly confronting the person could put Lucas in even greater danger. I suggest immediate hospitalization for detoxification and a discreet investigation while he is protected. Robert felt the weight of the revelation like a suffocating cloak. The woman he had brought into his home, into his life, close to his son. Could it be possible that behind that facade of care and dedication lay something so disturbing? I need concrete evidence, he murmured, more to himself than to Melissa. I can't act based only on suspicions. I understand, responded the doctor, but while we seek that evidence, the priority must be to protect Lucas. Upon returning home that night with Lucas asleep in his arms, Robert found Isabella in the living room, visibly anxious. You took so long. I was about to call the police. Her voice betrayed an irritation she rarely demonstrated. The birthday extended longer than expected, responded Robert, maintaining his composure. Lucas had so much fun that he ended up falling asleep in the car. As he climbed the stairs with his son in his arms, he felt Isabella's gaze burning into his back. For the first time since he had met her, that look didn't convey comfort or complicity, but something much more sinister, something that made his paternal instincts rise like a protective wall around Lucas. That same night, after Isabella finally fell asleep, Robert made a call that would change the course of events. He contacted a private security company specialized in discreet surveillance. It was time to discover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The Boston sky dawned heavy that Saturday, with dense clouds that seemed to reflect Robert's state of mind. He had slept only a few hours, his mind a whirlwind of suspicions and fear. Beside him, Isabella slept serenely, her angelic face in cruel contrast to the terrible possibilities that now haunted him. The security company technicians would come that afternoon, during the period when Isabella would be at the social project, a monthly commitment she never cancelled. The plan was to install discrete cameras at strategic points in the house: kitchen, Lucas's room, living room, and especially in the small hallway cabinet where Isabella kept the boys' medications. During breakfast, Robert made an effort to maintain normalcy, discussing trivialities and plans for the following week, as if his world wasn't silently crumbling. Lucas, in turn, seemed unusually animated, the day without medication apparently having a positive residual effect. "Can I play with Caleb in the garden today?" asked the boy, his cheeks exhibiting a blush that hadn't appeared in weeks. Before Robert could respond, Isabella intervened with her usual softness. "I don't think it would be prudent, dear. Your legs are still weak, and the weather is unstable. How about we watch that dinosaur documentary I downloaded for you? We can do that in your bed very comfortably." Lucas visibly wilted, but didn't protest. The ease with which he accepted the negative left Robert even more alarmed. His son, previously stubborn and argumentative like any healthy child, now docilely submitted to the restrictions imposed by Isabella. "Actually," Robert intervened, maintaining a casual tone, "I think some fresh air would do him good. Mrs. Annie can supervise the boys in the garden gazebo, where they'll be protected if it rains." An almost imperceptible shadow crossed Isabella's face. "Well, if you insist. But first he needs to take his morning medication. He's already 15 minutes late, actually." "I'll give it to him myself," offered Robert, quickly standing up. "That way you can finish your coffee peacefully before leaving for the project." Something in the firmness of his voice must have alerted Isabella that insisting would be suspicious, as she merely nodded, though her eyes attentively followed as Robert headed to the medicine cabinet. In the hallway, away from Isabella's gaze, Robert opened the vial marked as morning vitamins, and instead of administering the contents to Lucas, poured the capsules into a small envelope that he kept in his pocket. Later, he would send it for analysis to an independent laboratory, through Melissa. Returning to the dining room, he pretended to give the medication to his son, offering him water and discreetly winking, his particular signal with Lucas since the boy was small, indicating a special complicity between father and son. "All done," he announced, carefully observing Isabella's reaction. "Now we can start our day." The hours that followed were an exercise in self-control for Robert. Each smile, each casual conversation with Isabella seemed like a betrayal to Lucas, but he knew he needed to keep up appearances until he had concrete proof. When she finally left for her commitment at the social project, Robert felt his shoulders relax for the first time in days. "Dad?" Lucas's voice brought him back to reality. The boy was playing in the garden gazebo with Caleb, under Mrs. Annie's watchful eye. "Why didn't you really give me the medicine today? It was our little secret, right?" Robert felt a tightness in his chest. His son's perception, even amid the fog of medications that normally kept him sedated, was a painful reminder of his natural intelligence, the same intelligence that Isabella seemed determined to suppress. "Yes, son, our little secret," he confirmed, bending down to be at the boy's eye level. "Sometimes it's good to take a break from medicines to see how you feel, understand?" Lucas nodded solemnly. "I feel better when I don't take them. My legs still hurt a little, but I don't get so sleepy." That innocent confession was like a knife to Robert's heart. How many times had his son tried to communicate his discomfort? How many signs had he missed, blinded by his trust in Isabella? The security technicians arrived punctually at 2 p.m., disguised as an air conditioning maintenance team. In less than 2 hours, they installed ultra-modern cameras in strategic locations, all connected to a secure server that Robert could access remotely from his phone or computer. "The cameras are practically undetectable," explained the team. Leader, an ex-policeman with a severe expression. "Israeli technology used in intelligence operations. They capture images even with little light and have microphones sensitive enough to record conversations in a normal tone." Robert nodded, a knot in his throat preventing him from speaking. He never imagined he would need to spy on his own home to protect his son. "Mr. Morgan," continued the man, his tone now more personal, "we have worked with delicate situations for many years. If I may make a suggestion, regardless of what these cameras reveal, keep calm. People who harm children often react unpredictably when confronted." The warning, made with the gravity of someone who had already witnessed the worst aspects of human nature, sent a chill down Robert's spine. After the technician's departure, all that remained was to wait. Isabella would return in a few hours, and the house routine would return to normal, a normal that Robert now suspected was a facade for something deeply disturbing. It was at the end of that afternoon, while organizing some documents in his office, that Robert received an unexpected visit. Caleb, Mrs. Annie's son, timidly knocked on the door, his eyes revealing a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Mr. Robert, can I talk to you? It's important." Intrigued by the unusual seriousness in the normally relaxed boy, Robert invited him in. "Of course, Caleb, did something happen?" The boy remained silent for a few moments, as if organizing his thoughts or gathering courage. Finally, with a trembling but determined voice, he said, "It's about Ms. Isabella, Mr. Robert. I think she's harming Lucas." The impact of those words, coming from a child's mouth, hit Robert like a physical punch. So it wasn't just his imagination or paranoia. Another person and an observant child had reached the same terrible conclusion. "Why do you think that, Caleb?" he asked, keeping his voice controlled so as not to frighten the boy. "I see things," responded Caleb, the words now coming out in an anxious torrent. "Things she does when she thinks no one is looking. She puts strange powders in Lucas's food, only in his. And she has some vials that she hides when we get close. Once I entered his room without making noise because I wanted to show him a beetle I had found, and she was injecting something into his arm while he slept. Robert felt his stomach turn. Injecting? Are you sure? Yes, sir. With a small syringe, like those insulin ones my Uncle Gerald uses. When she saw me, she quickly hid it and said it was vitamins that the doctor had prescribed it. But I've already seen my uncle applying insulin, and it's not done that way. And when did this happen, Caleb? About 2 weeks ago. I wanted to tell before, but the boy lowered his eyes, visibly embarrassed. Ms. Isabella said that if I told anything about what I saw, she would make sure my mother lost her job. That no one would believe me because I'm just a poor boy. The cruelty of that threat directed at a child made Robert's blood boil. It was the final confirmation that, behind the facade of care and affection, there was a cold calculator who wouldn't hesitate to manipulate and threaten to maintain her control. You did the right thing in telling me, Caleb, he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. And I promise that your mother won't lose her job. In fact, you two are very important to this family. Caleb's eyes lit up with relief. So, you believe me? Yes, I do. And I need you to be very brave now. Could you repeat all this you told me to some people who are going to help us protect Lucas? The boy nodded solemnly. I can. For Lucas, I'd do anything. He's like a brother to me. That innocent and fierce loyalty brought tears to Robert's eyes, while he, blinded by trust and perhaps by the convenience of having someone taking over Lucas's care, had ignored signs of danger. An 11-year-old child had perceived the truth and had the courage to speak up, even under threat. That night, after Isabella returned and the house plunged into its usual nightly routine, Robert locked himself in his office with the pretext of working on an urgent proposal. In reality, he was glued to his laptop screen, observing the images transmitted by the newly installed cameras. For 2 hours, nothing especially suspicious happened. Isabella prepared a tea for Lucas, read a story, adjusted his blankets. Her gestures, seen in isolation, were those of an attentive caregiver. But now, observing with eyes opened by suspicion, Robert noticed small disturbing details. The almost obsessive insistence that Lucas drink the tea to the last drop, the way she checked his pupils after ingestion, as if evaluating the effect of something, the satisfaction on her face when the boy began to show signs of extreme drowsiness. It was when Isabella briefly left the room that the situation took an unexpected turn. Lucas, apparently fighting against the sedative effect of whatever was in the tea, extended his hand to the water glass on his nightstand and, in a movement that seemed deliberate, knocked it over onto the bed. When Isabella returned and saw the spilled water, her reaction was disproportionate. "What did you do?" she hissed, her normally melodious voice transforming into something harsh and unrecognizable. "It was on purpose, wasn't it?" "Sorry," muttered Lucas, shrinking against the pillows. "It was an accident." "It's always an accident with you," she continued, ripping off the wet sheets with abrupt movements. "Always making things difficult. Do you know how much work it takes me to keep you in this state? How much planning? And you keep sabotaging everything with these rebellions." Lucas, eyes wide with fear, seemed tiny against Isabella's growing fury. "Why do you give me medicines that make me sick?" he asked, his voice small but clear enough to be captured by the microphone. The question seemed to freeze Isabella for a moment. Then, quickly recomposing herself, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What are you talking about, dear? The medicines are to help you get better. But I feel worse when I take them. And today, when Dad didn't give me the medicine in the morning, I was able to play in the garden without falling." A tense silence followed that innocent revelation. Robert, observing the scene through the computer screen, noticed the exact moment when Isabella's mask fell completely. Her face transformed into a mask of cold fury, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost unrecognizable. "Your father didn't give you the medicine?" "Is that what you said? When?" Lucas, realizing too late his mistake, tried to retract. No, I got confused." But Isabella was already leaning over him, holding his small shoulders forcefully. "Don't lie to me. What else are you?" Hiding? Does he know something? Answer, Lucas. The terror on his son's face was the trigger. Without thinking twice, Robert jumped up and ran to Lucas's room, taking the stairs 2 at a time. As he burst through the door, he found Isabella leaning over the boy, shaking him by the shoulders while he cried. "Take your hands off my son," ordered Robert, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella turned, surprised by the sudden intrusion, but recovered quickly. "Robert, what a scare. Lucas had a terrible nightmare and I was trying to calm him." It was impressive how she could change personas in a matter of seconds, the uncontrolled fury giving way to the concerned caregiver without any visible transition. If Robert hadn't witnessed the previous scene through the monitor, he might even have believed the performance to step away from him now. The order left no room for discussion. Something in Robert's tone or expression must have communicated that the farce was over, as Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. Slowly, she moved away from the bed. "What's happening, Robert? Why are you acting like this?" "Lucas," he called, deliberately ignoring Isabella. "Come with Daddy, we're going to my room tonight." The boy didn't need a second invitation. He jumped out of bed and ran to his father's arms, burying his face in his chest as if seeking refuge from an invisible monster. "This is ridiculous," protested Isabella, her voice now laden with indignation. "I've been taking care of him for months, dedicating my life to you two, and this is how you thank me? With distrust?" Robert looked her directly in the eyes for the first time since entering the room. "We'll talk tomorrow, Isabella, when we're calmer. For now I need to take care of my son." With Lucas safe in his arms, Robert left the room, feeling Isabella's furious gaze burning into his back. He had no doubt that the real confrontation was still to come, and it would be much more explosive than this brief encounter. In the hallway, as he carried Lucas to his own room, the boy whispered in his ear, "Daddy, I'm afraid of her." Those 4 simple words, laden with a child's genuine terror, solidified Robert's resolution. No matter who Isabella really was, or what her motives, she would never get near his son again. "Don't be afraid, son," he promised, hugging Lucas with protective force. "Daddy is here now, and I won't let anything bad happen to you. Never again." That night, with Lucas finally sleeping safely by his side, Robert made 3 calls, to Melissa, to his trusted lawyer, and to the police. The approaching storm would be devastating, but he was prepared to face it. For Lucas, he would face hell if necessary. The morning arrived with a merciless clarity, illuminating every corner of the Morgan mansion, as if insisting on bringing to light secrets long hidden in the shadows. Robert hadn't slept. He had spent the night watching over Lucas's restless sleep, observing each breath of his son as if fearing that upon closing his eyes the boy might disappear. The calls made the previous night had set in motion a carefully coordinated operation. Melissa would arrive at 9 a.m., accompanied by a toxicologist she trusted, to collect blood and hair samples from Lucas, evidence that could prove prolonged exposure to toxic substances. Robert's lawyer, attorney Andrew Miller, would come soon after to legally document the testimonies and guide the next legal steps. As for the police, Detective Patricia Vasquez had agreed to keep a discreet patrol car on standby in the vicinity, awaiting the signal to intervene if necessary. Everything was meticulously planned, except for one crucial detail: how to keep Isabella in the house without arousing her suspicions until all those involved arrived. The answer came from an unexpected source. At 7 a.m., as Robert prepared a simple breakfast for Lucas, avoiding using any kitchen item that Isabella might have manipulated, Mrs. Annie arrived for work. One look at Robert's somber expression and at Lucas, protectively nestled in his father's arms, was enough for the housekeeper to understand that something serious had happened. "Mr. Robert," she began hesitantly, placing her purse on the counter, "are you okay?" And the boy, "No, Annie, we're not okay," he responded frankly, "but we will be. I'll need your help today." In a few words, Robert explained the situation, confirming the suspicions that the housekeeper herself had harbored for months. Silent tears ran down Mrs. Annie's wrinkled face as she absorbed the monstrosity of Isabella's actions. "My God in heaven," she murmured, making the sign of the cross. "That woman, with that saintly manner, harming an innocent child, And I, who let her take over the kitchen, who didn't say anything when I saw Lucas getting worse after her meals. Don't blame yourself, Annie. We were all deceived. Robert briefly squeezed the housekeeper's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical affection that demonstrated how much he valued her loyalty. Now we need to keep Isabella here until Dr. Melissa and the authorities arrive. Can you help me with this? A determined gleam appeared in the lady's eyes. You can count on me, Mr. Robert. I'll prepare that special breakfast she likes so much with those cheese buns that take time in the oven, and I'll stall with 1,000 conversations if necessary. Mrs. Annie's improvised plan worked surprisingly well. When Isabella finally came down around 8 a.m., she found the housekeeper exceptionally talkative, describing in unnecessary detail each step of preparing the special breakfast she had decided to make, in gratitude for everything Miss Isabella has done for the family. Isabella, clearly suspicious due to the absence of Robert and Lucas, accepted the coffee cup offered, her eyes constantly darting to the stairs. Has Robert come down yet? And Lucas? She finally asked, interrupting Mrs. Annie's monologue about the origin of the cheeses used in the cheese buns. Oh, Mr. Robert left early with the boy. Said he was taking him for breakfast at Sid's Bakery, the one that makes those cream-filled donuts that Lucas loves. Father and son thing, you know. But he left word that they'll be back soon before 9 because it seems there's a doctor's appointment scheduled. The mention of doctor made Isabella visibly stiffen. Doctor? What doctor? Dr. Paul is traveling. Oh, I can't say, Miss Isabella. He just mentioned he had scheduled an appointment. Maybe it's with another doctor for a second opinion. You know how Mr. Robert is, always wanting to ensure the best for the boy. Isabella's cup hit the saucer forcefully. Second opinion. He didn't mention anything about this to me. Well, the sir has been so busy, right? Sometimes he really forgets to comment on things. Mrs. Annie continued her carefree chatter, observing from the corner of her eye as Isabella frantically checked her cell phone, probably looking for messages from Robert. At 8:45 a.m., the tension in the air was almost palpable. Isabella had tried to call Robert 3 times, all without response. Her facade of calm was beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of the anxiety consuming her from within. I think I'll go up and get ready, she finally announced, rising from the table. When Robert arrives, please ask him to call me. Of course, Miss Isabella. Oh, and breakfast, won't you wait for the cheese buns? They're almost out of the oven. I've lost my appetite. With those dry words, Isabella headed to the stairs, her quick steps betraying her agitation. As soon as she disappeared upstairs, Mrs. Annie took her cell phone and sent a succinct message to Robert, who was waiting with Lucas at the lawyer's office located a few blocks away. She's restless, better return soon. The response was immediate. We're on our way with Melissa. Keep her distracted for 15 more minutes. Exactly at 9:05 a.m., the sound of several cars parking in front of the mansion announced the group's arrival. Robert entered first, carrying Lucas in his arms, followed by Melissa, a middle-aged man carrying a medical bag, and attorney Andrew Miller, a grey-haired lawyer whose grave expression matched the seriousness of the situation. She's up there, informed Mrs. Annie in a low voice. In your room. Robert nodded, handing Lucas over to Melissa's care. Take him to the living room and start the exams. I'll call her. Be careful, warned the lawyer. No confrontations before we collect the necessary evidence. With determined steps, Robert climbed the stairs. Each step seemed to transport him closer to a truth that, even already knowing, he was terrified to confront directly. How could someone he had trusted so much, to whom he had opened his home and heart, have deliberately harmed his son? He found Isabella in the master bedroom, methodically packing a suitcase on the bed. Upon seeing him, she froze for an instant, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, you're back. I was just organizing some clothes. The casual tone contrasted with the obvious activity of packing. Where's Lucas? Mrs. Annie mentioned something about a doctor. Yes, he's with Dr. Melissa now in the living room. The pediatrician's name made Isabella visibly pale. Melissa? I thought she was traveling. Curious you mentioned that, responded Robert, keeping his voice controlled, despite the anger boiling beneath the surface. Because she never left Boston. There was never any trip to Barcelona, nor international conference, nor postcards. A tense silence settled between them. Isabella seemed to be calculating her options, her eyes occasionally darting to the half-packed suitcase and to the bedroom door. "Clearly, there's a misunderstanding," she finally said, her voice recovering the soft melody she always used in moments of tension. "Why don't we talk calmly? You seem stressed, Robert. The problem's at the company, Lucas's condition, and it's understandable that you're looking for someone to blame." "I'm not looking for someone to blame, Isabella. I've already found them." Robert took a step forward, his expression hardening. "I have evidence. Recordings, witnesses, preliminary analyses of the medications you administered to Lucas without my knowledge. I know what you've been doing to my son." For a brief moment, something dark and furious flashed in her eyes, the same look that Robert had witnessed through the camera the night before. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the expression transformed into a mask of hurt and indignation. "How can you say something like that? After everything I've done for you, I sacrificed my career, my independence, everything to care for Lucas, as if he were my own son." "That's exactly the problem, Isabella. Lucas is not your son. He never was. And what you did wasn't caring for him. It was deliberately harming him, making him dependent, physically weakening him, isolating him." As he spoke, Robert circled the bed, approaching the door, a strategic movement to block any escape attempt. The tension in the room was almost suffocating, like the heavy air that precedes a violent storm. "You don't understand," she responded, her voice now lower, almost hypnotic. "Lucas needs special care. He has genetic predispositions for serious neurological conditions inherited from Hannah. I'm just intervening preventively, protecting him from greater suffering in the future." The mention of Hannah's name, used as justification for her monstrous actions, was the last straw. Robert felt anger explode within him, a primitive and protective fury that only a father could understand. "Don't you dare use her name." The words came out as a roar. "Hannah loved Lucas more than her own life. She would never, ever allow someone to poison our son in the name of special care." For a moment, both remained motionless, the accusation hanging in the air between them like something alive and pulsating. Then, slowly, Isabella's posture changed. She straightened her shoulders, raised her chin, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost any pretense of warmth or affection. "You really have no idea, do you?" A cold smile curved her lips. "How easily I entered your life, how perfectly I fit into the role you unconsciously sought. Not just a partner, but someone to take on the responsibilities you always found so heavy. Lucas's upbringing, medical decisions, household organization, everything you secretly resented, having to manage alone after Hannah's death." Robert took a step back, stunned by the cruel precision of the observation. There was an uncomfortable truth there. He had indeed felt relief in sharing the burden of single parenthood, in having someone who seemed so competent taking over aspects of Lucas's life that intimidated him. "That doesn't justify what you did," he responded, regaining his composure. "Nothing justifies deliberately harming a child." "Harming?" Isabella let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. "I was building our future, Robert. A perfect arrangement where everyone won. You would have freedom to focus on your precious company. I would have the social recognition of dedicatedly caring for a sick boy, and Lucas, well, he would be loved in his own way, protected, educated, albeit with some limitations." The calculating coldness with which she described her plan, as if talking about a business strategy and not the life of an innocent child, left Robert nauseated. For the first time, he glimpsed the true Isabella, not the dedicated caregiver, not the loving partner, but a manipulator who saw people as pieces in her own perverse game. "Why?" The question escaped his lips before he could contain it. "Why? Do this? What satisfaction could you obtain in making my son dependent and sick?" Isabella's smile acquired an almost dreamy quality, her eyes focusing on something beyond Robert, as if contemplating a particular vision that only she could see. "You would never understand. It's the control, Robert, the absolute power over another person. Seeing someone completely dependent on you, looking at you as their savior, their protector against the pain that you yourself cause. It's transcendental. A shiver ran down Robert's spine. He wasn't just facing someone who had committed terrible acts. He was facing someone who deeply believed in the righteousness of those acts, who derived pleasure from them. You're sick, Isabella. You need help. Help? She laughed again, the sound echoing disturbingly in the quiet room. I am the help, Robert. I'm the one who rescues traumatized children, who dedicates life to noble causes. Ask anyone in our social circle. They'll all say the same. Isabella is an angel, so dedicated to the social project, so loving with Robert's son. As she spoke, she moved subtly around the room, her eyes occasionally darting to the purse on the dresser, a movement that didn't go unnoticed by Robert. What's in the purse, Isabella? She froze for an instant, then forced an expression of confusion. What are you talking about? The purse, where your eyes keep going. What's in there? More medications for Lucas? A dangerous gleam lit up in her eyes. You really want to... No, Robert. Want to know what would happen if I weren't here to care for Lucas? The symptoms that would arise during sudden withdrawal from the substances I've been carefully administering for months? Believe me, it wouldn't be pleasant. The implicit threat made Robert's blood freeze in his veins. Are you threatening me? I'm merely stating medical facts. Abrupt interruptions of certain medications can cause severe reactions, convulsions, hallucinations, organ failure. It would be a shame, wouldn't it? Especially considering that I have the knowledge for a gradual and safe reduction. It was the final blow, the desperate attempt to maintain her control over the situation, over Lucas, over the family she had manipulated for so long. Robert felt a chill as he realized how close he had been to completely surrendering his son's health to the hands of this woman. Enough games, Isabella, it's over. With a quick movement, Robert pressed the emergency button on his watch, the signal arranged with Detective Vasquez to indicate it was time to intervene. Realizing she had lost her last card, something changed in Isabella's eyes. The cold calculation gave way to a wild, primordial fury. With a surprisingly agile movement, she grabbed a lamp from the bedside table and advanced toward Robert. You're not going to take this from me, she shouted, all pretense of control abandoned. No one will. The impact of the lamp was blocked by Robert's raised arm, but the force of the blow still made him stagger backward. Before Isabella could attack again, the bedroom door was violently opened, revealing Detective Vasquez and two uniformed police officers. Stop. Police! The detective's authoritative voice cut the air like a blade. For a moment, suspended in time, Isabella remained motionless, the lamp still raised, her eyes quickly passing from Robert to the police officers, calculating her chances. Then, slowly, as if awakening from a trance, she lowered the improvised weapon. This is a terrible misunderstanding, she said, her voice recovering part of its usual softness, although a note of desperation now permeated it. We were just having a heated discussion. Couple things. Isabella Martinez, began the detective formally. You are being detained for investigation on suspicion of bodily injury, unauthorized administration of harmful substances, and attempted assault. While one of the officers advanced with the handcuffs, Isabella cast one last look at Robert, a look that contained not regret or remorse, but a silent promise that this wasn't over. You don't understand what you've done, she whispered as she was handcuffed. He needs me. You'll see. Without me, he'll wither. The words, laden with disturbing certainty, hung in the air even after Isabella was led out of the room. Robert remained motionless for a few moments, absorbing the complete impact of what had just happened, of what could have happened if he hadn't discovered the truth in time. Downstairs, Lucas's crying brought him back to reality. His son whom he had almost lost to Isabella's cruel manipulation, needed him now more than ever. Rushing down the stairs, Robert found Lucas in Melissa's arms, silent tears running down the boy's face as he watched Isabella being placed in the police car. Is she coming back, Dad? Asked Lucas, his voice small and trembling. Robert took his son in his arms, hugging him with all the strength that wouldn't hurt the boy's already fragile body. No, son, she'll never get near you again, I promise. As the patrol car drove away, taking with it the woman who had almost destroyed his family, Robert knew that the recovery journey would be long, not just for Lucas's body, but for the trust of both father and son in the goodness of the world. "Are we going to be okay?" asked Lucas, clinging to his father's shirt as if fearing being torn from his arms. Robert kissed the top of his son's head, inhaling the familiar smell of his hair, the same smell that had calmed him on sleepless nights after Hannah's departure, the same smell that now represented everything he had almost lost. "Yes, son, we're going to be okay. We have each other. That's all we need." And in that moment, with Lucas safe in his arms and the nightmare finally coming to an end, Robert allowed himself to believe that those words were true. 3 months had passed since that fateful morning. The Massachusetts winter had given way to a vibrant spring, and with it new beginnings blossomed in the Morgan mansion. The windows, previously often closed, now remained open, allowing the perfumed September breeze to circulate freely through the rooms, as if to clean the last vestiges of the dark months. In the backyard, under the generous shade of a centennial oak tree, Lucas played with Caleb. The boys' laughter filled the air, a sound that Robert had feared he would never hear again. Sitting on the porch, watching them while reviewing some documents, he couldn't avoid the smile that formed on his lips each time Lucas ran, jumped, or simply moved with the natural energy of a 7-year-old child. Lucas's physical recovery surprised even the most experienced doctors. As soon as the toxic substances were eliminated from his system, his vitality began to gradually return. The mysterious pains in his legs disappeared. Lethargy gave way to an almost inexhaustible energy, and even his appetite, previously suppressed by the medications Isabella administered, returned with full force, to the delight of Mrs. Annie, who now prepared with redoubled pleasure the boys' favorite dishes. "It's like a miracle," Dr. Melissa had commented during the last appointment 3 weeks ago. "The child's body has an extraordinary capacity for recovery as long as it's given the proper time and environment." The environment, Robert had made sure, couldn't be more appropriate. The mansion had undergone a meticulous transformation after Isabella's arrest. Each vial, each object that could remind of her was removed. The rooms were repainted, furniture repositioned, and even the daily routine of the house was completely restructured, a cleaning not only physical but symbolic, as if the house itself was being healed along with its inhabitants. The emotional recovery, however, proved to be a more complex and delicate process. Lucas still occasionally woke up with nightmares, calling for his father in the middle of the night, fearing to find Isabella beside his bed with more medicines to make him sleep. In these moments, Robert ran to his son's room, hugged him firmly, and repeated the same comforting words. "She can't hurt you anymore. I'm here. I'll always be here." On the recommendation of a new child psychologist, carefully selected after extensive research and multiple interviews, Lucas now participated in therapy sessions 3 times a week. Dr. Caroline, a middle-aged lady with decades of experience in childhood trauma, used playful approaches to help the boy process what he had experienced without re-traumatizing him. "He's progressing extraordinarily well," she reported to Robert after that morning's session. "Art has been particularly therapeutic. Have you noticed how his drawings have changed in recent weeks?" Robert nodded. Lucas's first drawings after the incident were dominated by dark colors, shadowy, figures in corners of pages, small silhouettes hidden in confined spaces. Gradually, colors returned, as did representations of open spaces, gardens, parks, blue sky, and most significantly, he himself began to appear in the illustrations as a larger, more present figure, often holding hands with his father. Robert himself had also sought professional help. The weekly sessions with Dr. Richard, a psychiatrist recommended by Melissa, helped him process the feelings of guilt and anger that consumed him in the first days after the discovery. "You couldn't have predicted it," repeated Dr. Richard Andy almost every session. "People with this psychological profile are exceptional manipulators. They study their victims, identify vulnerabilities and needs, and then present themselves as the perfect solution. You were vulnerable after years of mourning and overload, trying to balance the roles of single father and businessman. You were the ideal target." Rationally, Robert understood this. but the paternal heart still twisted when thinking about how long Lucas had suffered silently, while he, blinded by the convenience of having someone assuming responsibilities that overwhelmed him, ignored the signs. "If it weren't for Caleb," he frequently muttered, observing with gratitude the boy who had had the courage to speak when adults failed to see. The legal process against Isabella advanced slowly, as was to be expected in complex cases. The evidence was abundant and compelling. Toxicological analyses proving the presence of multiple controlled substances in Lucas's system, medical testimonies documenting the deterioration of his health coinciding with her arrival, the security camera recordings, Caleb's testimony, and most devastating, Isabella's own diaries, found during a search of her previous apartment, meticulously maintained notebooks where she recorded dosages, reactions, and her satisfaction in seeing Lucas become progressively more dependent. The diaries revealed something even more disturbing. Lucas wasn't her first victim. Before him, there had been at least 3 other children, all from affluent families, all presenting mysterious symptoms that made them dependent on constant care. In each case, Isabella had approached as a caregiver, gained the family's trust, and then initiated her methodical process of poisoning disguised as treatment. Even more alarming were the connections discovered between Isabella and certain professionals, like Dr. Paul, who apparently collaborated with her scheme, providing vague diagnoses and questionable prescriptions in exchange for consulting fees paid by front foundations. "It's a network," explained Detective Vasquez during her last visit to the mansion 2 weeks ago. "We're just beginning to unravel it, but it seems to involve doctors, pharmacists, even social workers, people in positions of trust who take advantage of vulnerable families." The revelation had left Robert nauseated, but also reinforced his determination to proceed with the process, not just for Lucas, but for all the other children who might be suffering silently at the hands of similar predators. On that particular afternoon, as he watched Lucas and Caleb building an improvised fort with pillows and sheets in the garden, Robert was interrupted by the ring of his cell phone. It was Attorney Andrew, his lawyer. "We have news," he announced without preamble. "Isabella has accepted a deal. Complete confession in exchange for sentence reduction. More importantly, she will provide names and evidence against others involved. In the network." Robert felt a knot in his throat. Why? Why would she collaborate now? Self-preservation, probably. The evidence against her is overwhelming, and the prosecution made it clear they would seek the maximum penalty. With the deal, she will still face years in prison, but avoids a sentence that would keep her incarcerated for the rest of her life. After hanging up, Robert remained motionless for a few minutes, absorbing the meaning of that news. It wasn't exactly justice. Nothing could compensate for the suffering inflicted on Lucas and the other children, but it was a step toward closure, toward the possibility of moving forward without the weight of a prolonged legal process. "Dad, look what we made!" Lucas's enthusiastic voice brought Robert back to the present. The boy proudly pointed to the pillow fort, now decorated with improvised flags made of colored paper. "Impressive, son," responded Robert, standing up to inspect the boy's creation more closely. "A real castle." "Caleb said we can sleep here. Tonight, can we? With flashlights and everything?" Before he could respond, the mansion's intercom rang, announcing the arrival of Clara, Hannah's sister, and Lucas's godmother. Since the incident with Isabella, Clara had become a more constant presence in their lives, reorganizing her doctor's schedule to visit her nephew regularly. "Aunt Clara is here," exclaimed Lucas, running toward the main house with Caleb on his heels. Robert observed his son move away, marveling at his resilience. Children, he thought, possess an extraordinary ability to heal emotional wounds when surrounded by genuine love and proper support. Clara entered the garden minutes later, carrying bags of presents and with Lucas hanging from her neck, laughing joyfully. Tall and elegant as Hannah had been, with the same expressive eyes that Lucas had inherited, Clara radiated a warm energy that always brought light to the environments she frequented. "Look who's looking more and more like a healthy and happy boy every day," she exclaimed, kissing her nephew's cheek. "And that tan? Have you been spending all afternoons in the garden, huh?" "We made a fort, Auntie. Come see." While Lucas dragged his aunt to inspect the construction, Mrs. Annie approached Robert with a tray of fresh lemonade. "The lawyer called," she asked discreetly. Even without having heard the conversation, her years of living with Robert made her sensitive to changes in his expression. "Yes, Isabella accepted a deal. She'll confess and turn in the others involved." The housekeeper made the sign of the cross, murmuring a brief prayer. "Thank God, now we can really turn this page." Robert nodded, his eyes fixed on Lucas, who was animatedly gesturing while explaining to Clara the special features of the fort. "Yes, I think we can." Dinner that night was especially festive. Clara had brought not only presents for Lucas, but also exciting news. She had been invited to head a new department at the hospital where she worked, which would mean fewer trips and more time in Boston, therefore more visits to Lucas. "And there's more," she announced during dessert. "A chocolate cake specially prepared by Mrs. Annie. Remember the foundation that Hannah wanted to create before leaving, to support children with rare diseases?" Robert nodded. It had been one of the last projects Hannah had mentioned, inspired by a pediatric patient she had attended shortly before her own diagnosis. "Well, I reactivated the paperwork. With everything that happened with Lucas, I realized how important it is to have reliable resources and information for families dealing with complex medical conditions. Vulnerable people become easy targets when they're desperate for answers and support." The idea deeply touched Robert. It was as if Hannah, even absent, still found ways to protect children like her son. "I want to participate," he said, without hesitation. "Not just financially. I want to be actively involved, use my business contacts to expand the reach." Clara smiled, her eyes shining in a way that reminded Robert so much of Hannah that he felt a familiar tightness in his chest. No longer the piercing pain of the first years after her departure, but a sweet, almost comforting longing. "Hannah would have loved this," commented Clara softly. "You two working together on something so meaningful." Later, after Lucas finally fell asleep in his fort in the garden, Robert had yielded to the request with the condition that a proper mattress be placed on the ground and that he himself sleep on a nearby lounge chair. Clara and Robert sat on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine and talking in low voices under the starry sky. "He's really recovering," observed Clara, looking in the direction of the improvised fort where Lucas and Caleb slept. "Physically, at least. How has it been emotionally?" Robert sighed, swirling the wine in his glass. "There are good days and difficult days. The nightmares are becoming less frequent, but they still happen. The psychologist says it's normal, part of the process." "And you, how have you been dealing with all this?" The question caught Robert by surprise. In recent weeks, he had been so focused on Lucas's recovery that he rarely stopped to evaluate his own emotional state. "I'm surviving," he responded honestly. "There are moments when the guilt is overwhelming. How did I not notice what was happening? How did I allow her to get so close?" Clara placed a hand over his, a simple gesture of comfort. "Don't torture yourself, Robert. You're not the first, nor will you be the last to be deceived by someone with Isabella's manipulative skills. The important thing is that you acted when you discovered the truth. You saved Lucas." "It wasn't me," corrected Robert. "It was Caleb. That boy saw what all of us, supposedly responsible adults, couldn't see. Because he looked with his heart, not with eyes clouded by convenience or need. Children often see truths that we, in our adult complexity, lose the ability to perceive." They remained silent for a few minutes, contemplating the stars that dotted the Boston sky. Less visible than in smaller cities, but still present, silent reminders that even in darkness, there are always points of light. "You know," began Clara. Hesitantly, "Hannah told me something shortly before leaving. She was worried about how you would handle everything alone, not because she doubted your ability as a father, but because she knew your tendency to take on all responsibilities, to rarely ask for help." Robert turned to her, intrigued. "What did she say?" "She said, remind Robert that being strong doesn't mean being solitary, that asking for help isn't weakness, but wisdom. She knew you would isolate yourself in the role of protective father, especially after losing her." Hannah's words, brought from the past by Clara's voice, deeply touched Robert. It was true. After Hannah's death, he had closed himself in a rigorous routine, rarely allowing himself moments of vulnerability, rarely accepting help even when clearly overloaded. Perhaps that had been his greatest failure. Not the trust in Isabella, but the previous reluctance to share the burden of single parenthood with those who genuinely cared. "I think I'm finally learning that lesson," he admitted. "In the hardest way possible, but I'm learning." Clara smiled, raising her glass in a silent toast. "Hannah would be proud of both of you." The next morning, Robert woke up to the sound of laughter. Lucas and Caleb were already awake, chasing each other around the garden with improvised water squirts made from plastic bottles. The rising sun illuminated the scene, transforming the water droplets into small, momentary rainbows. Stretching in the chair where he had spent the night, Robert observed his son, really observed him with renewed attention. His cheeks had recovered their healthy color. His movements were coordinated and energetic, and his eyes shone with genuine joy, the same carefree joy that should be every child's birthright. In that moment, something finally untied inside Robert's chest. The invisible rope that seemed to compress his heart since the discovery about Isabella loosened, allowing him to breathe completely for the first time in months. They had survived. More than that, they were rebuilding their lives, not despite the trauma, but incorporating it into their shared history, transforming it into strength and wisdom. The recovery, both physical and emotional, would continue for a long time. There would be relapses, difficult moments, painful memories that would arise at the most unexpected moments. But on that morning, under the rising sun of Boston, as he watched his son run free and happy, Robert allowed himself to believe in the power of human resilience, in the extraordinary capacity to heal even the deepest wounds when surrounded by true love. "Dad, come play with us." Lucas's enthusiastic call was impossible to resist. Laughing, Robert stood up and joined the boys in their aquatic game, allowing himself to be completely present in the moment, celebrating the simple joy of being alive, of being together, of being well. The road ahead would be long, with unexpected curves and obstacles to overcome, but now, with eyes open and heart alert, Robert knew he didn't need to travel it alone. Lucas had him, and he had Lucas. They had Clara, Mrs. Annie, Caleb, Melissa, a network of people who genuinely cared, who offered not just support, but unconditional love. And in the end, that was what really mattered. Not the grand houses or business empires, but authentic human connections, the bonds that sustain us in the darkest moments and that allow us to celebrate moments of light with full joy. As he ran through the garden, letting himself get wet by the water squirts and laughing along with his son, Robert finally understood the most valuable lesson that Hannah had tried to leave him, that true paternal heroism wasn't in being invulnerable or self-sufficient, but in having the courage to love completely, to ask for help when necessary, and to allow oneself to be human, with all the fragilities and strengths that implies. And so, under the blue Massachusetts sky, the Morgan family continued their healing journey, not erasing the past, but building a future where those painful experiences would serve as a